Welcome to the second hour of KCDC. There is new reporting just out from the New York Times that President Trump has expressed regret over signing the executive order that ended separation of migrant families. The Times says the president has been, quote, complaining to aides about why he could not just create an overarching executive order to solve the problem, according to two people familiar with the deliberations. Aides have had to explain to the president why a comprehensive immigration overhaul is beyond the reach of his executive powers. Joining me on set, senior political reporter for Yahoo News, John Ward. Washington Bureau Chief for Vice News, Shawna Thomas, is still with us. And political reporter for the New York Times, Ken Vogel, joins the conversation as well. And joining us from New York, senior reporter for Vanity Fair, MSNBC contributor, and author of Born Trump, Emily Jane Fox. Thank you all for being here. I want to start with this report from Maggie Haberman. Ken Vogel, your colleague at the New York Times, essentially saying that the president wishes that he hadn't done what he did last week. He wants to do something more sweeping, but oh wait, he can't. Meanwhile, he seems to have tweeted that the Congress shouldn't do anything because they can't until they get more seats in the Congress.
Yeah, and you see that regret being telegraphed a little bit in those tweets today, where he's talking about when someone comes into our country illegally, we should send them back from where they came immediately with no judges or court cases. That seems to directly contradict the executive order, which says we will keep the families together. We won't separate the families while they await processing while they are given due process. And then he flips and says, oh, no due process. So you see a little bit of regret there. You also see him kind of saying, see, I told you so. Like this wasn't a viable solution in the first place, and it's yet another twist in this very difficult to track administration position on this very thorny issue.
Right. Well, and the reality is, as long as it is simply executive action, the president could undo what he did last week at any point, and it doesn't seem as though Congress is getting ready to act. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is releasing data on the number of migrant children who have been reunited with their parents. The Department of Homeland Security says more than 500 kids have been placed back with their families, while another 2,000 remain in custody. Meanwhile, the town of Tornillo, Texas, hundreds of demonstrators rally against the White House's zero-tolerance immigration policy. It is the second straight day of protests in the town, and NBC News correspondent Cal Perry is there. He was in the middle of all the action. Cal, I think one challenge here, and one thing that we're trying to make sure we're doing from our vantage point here in Washington is to keep the focus on reuniting these children and to see if, in fact, the government is able to start to do that effectively. What are you hearing from the ground about how those efforts are going? Are officials working in ways that seem to be effective, or are there kids who right now are not finding their parents?
You know, the crazy thing about this story has been the lack of access that we've had to the facility behind me. There are some 250 to 270 kids on this government-run compound in the tent city. And so our information has been coming from lawmakers as they come and they try to penetrate this facility. They've been walking to the fence line, some of them invited, some of them not. And they've been getting into a various degree. The senior senator from New Mexico was here, Senator Tom Udall. He actually didn't get in a couple of days ago. He was shown some CCTV footage. It really upset him because, of course, he's the senior senator from New Mexico. Why shouldn't he get in to see the kids? He came back yesterday and he saw them. And when he came out, that was my first question to him was, what about this reunification? When are these 250 kids going to get back to their families? And he said, look, I asked the officials that inside the facility, and I was told that I, the senator, had to call back in a week. So I think that just speaks to the sort of haphazard nature that this all came together in the past week when, these senators are going in and they're asking for a plan and they're asking for details to the plan, and they're being told, look, just like the families, you're going to have to call back on Monday morning when we try to get our act together, Casey.
Cal, have you seen any evidence of a material change in policy since the executive order was signed? I mean, are agents doing things differently? Do you see evidence that families are, in fact, being kept together?
There's a lot of people waiting on the bridges that come from Juarez here into El Paso. And those families are waiting because while the policy has maybe shifted because of the executive order, there's a lack of trust there that the federal government's going to actually carry out those wishes. Certainly the policy hasn't changed for the kids in the tent city behind me. They're caught in this really weird loophole. They're just sitting there sort of after the old new policy has changed because of the executive order, but it's not clear how the executive order actually affects them because they're already in custody. So really unclear how they're going to be reunited with their families. And keep this in mind, Casey, you know, a lot of these kids, their parents are already back somewhere in Central Latin America. And so these kids are going to end up with a relative, or they're going to end up getting deported, or in some cases, they're going to end up in a third-party home somewhere across the U.S. And that's really, you know, the concern here as this kind of shakes out around the country, Casey.
Cal Perry in Tornillo, Texas. You're tireless, my friend. Thanks for your great work down there. I really appreciate it. Thanks. John Ward, I want to get your kind of take on this broadly because, I mean, especially this reunification challenge, I mean, there are a lot of, you know, charitable groups around the country that are involved in the foster care system around these kids. But you have seen, I mean, this was the one place where evangelical leaders broke with this president. You have, you know, the argument that people who are seeking asylum are not illegal immigrants. You know, right. What is the path forward here? Yeah, well, I mean, to Congress's point, to the point of lawmakers trying to get into those facilities, you would think that very, very soon we would see lawmakers holding hearings and hauling some of these people up to get answers if they really do want to get answers. That should be happening this week. They could do it. But I think more broadly, my interest in this is how did we get here? Why is the administration, apart from the fact that this is a issue that plays politically well for the president, pushing so hard on this? Because if you look at the numbers, you know, 20 years ago, you had 150,000 people coming across the border every month. It's now this year been below 50,000. It's come up a little bit this, you know, the last couple months. Right. And Richard Engel did some good reporting this morning on Meet the Press about some of the causes of that in Central America. But I think it really just raises the question of, is this anything else than the president just sort of betting on nativism and xenophobia in the country? And I think if you look at some of the poll numbers, sure, yeah, 3 out of 4 Republicans think immigrants should be punished if they come across the border. But I also think you've got, you know, the lowest amount of people in 20 years who think that immigration should be reduced. So I'm not sure. There's a lot of questions out there about whether or not this is a political winner for Trump. He certainly thinks it was in 2016, and he seems to be going that direction. He's making that bet again. Yeah. When I was on the border, I spoke with an immigration attorney, Andrew Nietor, who represents undocumented parents who have been separated from their children and is usually meeting with clients at that same facility 2 or 3 days a week. You've been doing work on reunifying these families. I mean, there are still over 1,000 children who are separated from their families. How do they go about finding their parents?
That's a big question because even the executive order was very thin on details. So it seems like the administration didn't put a lot of thought into any type of policy or system to reunite the families, even before the executive order. So we're still scrambling to first find out where the children are and then figure out how and where the reunification will take place.
What about in the cases where the kids are so young? You know, we've heard stories 8 months old, 11 months old, they can't advocate for themselves. How do you reunify those families?
That's been the biggest problem because it seems that the children that were separated from parents were basically lumped together with a lot of the unaccompanied children who came by themselves without any distinction between what the background of the child was. And so that system has literally thousands of children in it, and trying to find the child, pick that child up, and pick that child out of the group has been very difficult, especially when the child can't verbalize and can't say, hey, I came here with my mother, her name is so-and-so, and this is where she is. So we're very concerned about that because there seems to have been no thought into that reunification process, specifically for the particularly young children, the toddlers, the babies.
Across the country, the families who have taken in these migrant children have witnessed firsthand the pain and suffering that they have endured. We spoke with a foster mom in Michigan who asked that we obscure her face to protect her identity. She and her husband have been involved with the refugee foster care program for nearly 6 years and have put up close to 100 children from other countries, including a 5-year-old boy who arrived on Wednesday.
It's a boy. He arrived this morning after many delays of a flight trying to get here, and right now not trusting adults and very quiet, although he's been made a little bit of progress this morning. When kids first come like that and they're very quiet and shy and just you can tell they're really overwhelmed, we will make their world very small and then expand it as they start to explore and try to help them in healthy ways start to adjust to being in our home. There seems to be more of an intensity with the reactions of the kids as far as what's happening. They seem to know less of what's happening, and that always creates so much trauma on top of the trauma of the journey, on top of the trauma of why they left their country in the first place. Kids very upset. They just don't know what's going on. The anxiety level just, again, is very, very high. Stomach problems, they don't want to eat, sleeping troubles. It's been very difficult to watch them. We had a little girl that just left not too long ago, and that was all she said was mom, 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 mom. She had 2 words, and they basically amounted to mom and grandma, is what she is saying, and it probably was 2 weeks before she said anything else. Obviously, some people cope with some things better than others, but it will definitely, some people will probably never recover from being separated for this time period.
Really heartbreaking. Shauna Thomas, it does seem, this is somebody who has been helping deal with this problem for many years, but the difference, of course, is how much more difficult it is for a child who is physically separated from their parent, as opposed to one who, we have had many children who've come here alone.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these foster parents have dealt with those unaccompanied minors who are usually a little bit older because they came with coyotes or whatever. I think what that interview really exemplifies is this idea that the story is not going away until basically all 2,000 of the kids who are left find their parents, or the government finds their parents. And from a political standpoint, that's not great for the Trump administration. But there's a news organization that wants to be with the last kid that finds their parents. So this story keeps going, and we know that there is overall perhaps the government does know how to get the kids back together with their parents, and there are these ID numbers the parents and the kids are given to try to help that happen. Right. But as long as there is message confusion, as in no one seems to have a straight answer to how you're going to do it.
Right.
Exactly. That this will keep being a political question. This will keep being a policy question. This will be something that members of Congress, whether that be Democrats or Republicans, are going to continue to ask the administration for answers, just like the press is going to continue to ask the administration for answers. And so that's all those different threads that will keep this story going. And maybe we should keep this story going because, hey, kids are not with their parents. But it's just going to keep going and going until they figure this out.
Right. Emily Jane Fox, and to that point as well, you've written extensively about the president, his relationships with his family, what all of that is like. And clearly, he is very motivated by what he sees on TV. These images have been very difficult and very powerful, but also by what his daughter and reportedly his wife have been saying to him behind the scenes.
Sure. I think that there are a lot of people behind the scenes who have said to the president and to the president's family, this is not an issue that you want to be on the wrong side of. And there really is one thing for you to do, and that's to get these children back with their parents. And I think that there was a tremendous amount of political pressure and perhaps some familial pressure placed on the president last week, which is why you saw him sign the executive order. But you now hear the reports from the New York Times that he is regretful of signing that order. And so it just goes to show you that no matter who, whether it's people in his family or people on his base, whatever kind of pressure they are putting on him, ultimately he is the decider and the one who will make his own choices and perhaps ultimately regret those choices a couple of days later and reverse them completely.
And of course, according to a tweet from a friend of the show, Phil Rucker, Melania Trump is apparently giving a speech where she talks about how important it is to be kind.
After the jacket last week.
Yeah.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.